Hi, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to do a video from indoors because it's my only day of the week where I got opportunity to shoot and it is absolutely tipping it down at the moment. So unfortunately there's no outdoor photography today. So what I thought I'd do today is another quick and to the point video about something that a lot of beginners forget to include in their photography. So I've got my iPad with me. I'm going to use a few examples of my own work to show both bad and good examples of how you can use light in your photography. Now, when you think about light in photography, you may think about something obvious like a nice sunset or a nice sunrise. They're really good things to have in your photos. You get a nice sunrise or a nice sunset, that is good light that you can use in your photo. But what is the difference between bad light and good light? Well, I'm going to quickly go through some examples of my own work where I took some bad photos in bad light and then show examples of how I could have done better or what I could have done differently to get a much better photo. Let's start with the first one. Now, I just want to caveat in this video that everything I say in this video is almost all just personal opinion and stuff that I've learned from my own experience of photography. So it should be taken as such. Everybody is entitled to have a different opinion. That's the beauty of doing art in photography, is that art is subjective. So if you feel differently, you're allowed to feel differently. But this is just something that I wanted to share that I found has helped me in my photography to make sure I get good light in my photos. So there's loads of examples of bad light, but I think most of them come under two main categories. Let's talk about the first category, flat light. Now, what I mean by flat light is when there's absolutely no contrast in the picture. You're taking a picture of a subject that's either in the shade from something that's blocking the light, or it's an overcast day and it's just grey cloud, a thick blanket that means that there's no real bright spots. Now, this can be quite a good thing in many forms of photography. For example, if you're doing portrait photography, a nice soft light on the side of someone's face can look really good. It can be quite flattering. Whereas in outdoor and landscape photography and in street photography, we like to have contrast on our subjects. Let me show you a couple of examples of this. So this is a picture I got in last week's video as a bad example. Now, this lone tree in the middle of the lake, there's a few things I don't like about this photo. The lake, there's no reflection in it whatsoever because there was too much of a breeze that day. And also the tree looks really flat. There's no contrast on it whatsoever. That's because this was actually in shade at this time. It was really early in the morning and there was a big hill that was blocking any sunlight from reaching this tree. Now, because of that, the tree just looks flat and boring. And although there's a distinctive subject in this picture, it's not a good one. This next picture is another example of where flat light really ruins a picture. This was supposed to be a really nice sunrise on this day, but there was a bank of cloud completely blocking it, which meant that this subject just had no light on it whatsoever. There was no light in the sky and there was no light on the subject. That means that this picture just didn't work at all. But I went back a few months later to this exact same spot. Notice the difference here. Because I managed to catch some beautiful colors in the sky, and as the sun was just coming up and reflecting off those clouds on the horizon, you can see that this is a much, much better photo. This is a really obvious example of how light can make a difference to your photo. Even if you're a beginner, this is really obvious. Getting color in the sky and a nice sort of contrast in the background to the foreground means that the subject really pops and stands out, and the colors in the sky add so much interest to it that wasn't there in the other photo. So that's a really obvious example of using good light in your photos. This next photo is another example of flat light, but where I used it to my advantage. So as you can see here, there was a completely grey sky. In fact, there's rain coming down over the horizon, you can see in the background there. But because I used this car as a distinctive subject, there's a story in the picture. So despite the fact that there's not a lot of contrast in the scene, it's not boring. That's what you have to overcome when it comes to flat light. It's really easy to have a boring picture in flat light. Whereas what I found is if I find a way of telling a story in the picture, then that flat light matters much, much less, because adding a story to that picture means that there's a reason for the viewer to view it. It's not just a boring flat picture of a lone subject. This next picture is another way of overcoming flat light. The time of day that you're shooting in can make a massive difference to how good your photos are. This, for example, as you can see, was another cloudy day. There's a lovely cloud inversion in the valleys, but also there was a lot of cloud overhead, but that cloud was just catching the early morning sun. I think I took this about 5 o'clock in the morning, and you can see that that made a really pink sky. Now, because of that, it's not flat and boring. The subject still, if you look at it, isn't lit up. It doesn't have any contrast on it, but it does contrast with the background. And that's another way of adding contrast to your picture. If you can have some colours that really pop in your picture, then even on a flat light day, your subject can really still stand out. So that's the first form of bad light that we really don't want to have in our photos. If you can overcome flat light by having a story in your picture or by having some other form of contrast, you can still really have a picture worth viewing, not something that someone will just glance at and think it's just a very amateur looking photo, which is the risk with flat light photos. So let's move on now to what is the other major form of bad light, which is the complete opposite of flat light, and that's really harsh light. Now, this is the sort of light you get in the middle of a really bright sunny day, after golden hour in the morning and before golden hour in the evening. Now, this sort of light is a landscape photographer's worst nightmare, because it could be a really nice day to be out and about, but it can be really hard to get really nice looking subjects. This sort of light really lends itself to something like street photography, where you can really use contrast to make pictures really pop. When you have contrasting lines and shadows in buildings and on streets, it can look really nice and effective. But in landscape photography, it doesn't work quite as well. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that now. So this is an example of where harsh light really ruined my photo. There's quite a bit of side light, but it's really, really bright. And what that means is, if you look at these leaves here, they are almost all blown out because I wanted to keep the detail in the shadows. And if you look up in the sky, there's really bright spots up there. That means that the picture looks quite ugly to look at. It's really harsh light. There's too much contrast. And what that means is it's not a particularly pleasing photo. Another example of that is this one. Now, this had potential to be a good photo. You've got a really nice subject. There's nice contrast on the subject itself. It looks good. But if you notice up above it, these trees, they really blend into the background because there's harsh light on all of them. And that makes for a really distracting element in this photo. The viewer's eye is drawn away from the subject to that mess in the top. I could try cropping it a bit, but it cuts it off in really awkward places. So unfortunately, this photo is completely ruined simply because the light was wrong. Now, what can you do to overcome this? Well, here's another example of a picture that was taken in what could be considered harsh light, but the time of day I took it made a big difference. Now, once again, I'm going to start with the obvious one, doing it during golden hour. I took this at sunset. There's really bright light on these rocks, but because I went around behind the rocks and used them to sort of do a bowl shape around that harsh light, it means that you still get lots of colour, lots of interest, and there's no harsh light on the subject. So that means there's a nice bit of contrast without it being too much. There's no distracting elements in this photo. And that's the big thing with harsh light. Really distracting bright spots are what you want to get rid of. This is another example of when I took a picture in harsh light and it worked. So you can see that I use the harsh light to side light my subject. The angle you shoot from can make a massive difference to how good your subject looks in harsh light. So if I'd have taken this straight on with the sun shining directly on it, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as good because the rocks would have been too bright compared to the shadows. Whereas because I came round and shot this from an angle and just caught a bit of that light, there's a lovely warm glow on the right hand side of the rocks, but it's not distracting. And that's, once again, the really important thing when it comes to harsh light. Another great way of overcoming harsh light is by backlighting subjects. And this is something that I've really enjoyed doing this summer. As you can see here, we've got a couple of paddleboarders and their dogs on the sea. And it was a completely blue sky day when I took this. The sun was really quite high. It was in the middle of the day. So what I did was I put the subject between me and the sun. What that has meant is that these subjects really pop out again. Having these sort of silhouettes means that they really stand out against the background, which in my opinion looks really good. I love backlighting subjects. Next picture, exactly the same again. Another bright sunny day. We had a lot of these this summer, so I really had to lean into these sorts of photos. There was so much harsh light around. Because I've used backlighting on the subject really stands out against the background again. It's not lost, and there's no really harsh, bright spots other than the sun itself, which of course people expect to be bright and sunny. And finally, another example. This is a picture of my brother that I took last year. And what I've done here is, you'll notice, I've once again changed the angle that I photographed my subject in so that he just gets a little bit of contrast on his face and on the side of his body. And I've used really minimalist colours. So you've got the lovely yellows in the grass and the bright blues of the sky. And there's no distracting elements again in this photo. It's just this really simple, clean photo. And that's a great way of once again overcoming that problem. Also, you'll notice once again that there's a story in this photo. By adding that story of this person walking through the frame, it means that that harsh light is significantly less distracting. The viewer is drawn to the subject in the photo rather than any bright spots that could be really distracting in the picture. And finally, let's go on to the last form of really good light that I've really started trying to incorporate more into my photos. So this is another picture from last week's video. This is where I have spotlighted a subject using light. Now this is really difficult to do. You have to get your timing just right, and you have to be able to spot it in subjects around you while you're in a location. So as you can see here, this little outcrop of trees in the middle of the lake was just catching the sunlight before the trees in the background were catching as much sunlight. What that means is that these trees here in the middle, the actual subject of my photo, really stands out against the background. So this is a great way of adding contrast to your picture without losing the subject or without having any distracting bright spots. As you can see in the top right, it really was quite bright by this point in the day. The sun was starting to come up, and that meant that these trees were catching the light. But if I'd have timed this any later, the trees in the background would have caught just as much light as the ones in the foreground, which meant that they wouldn't have stood out as much. Now, spotlighting a subject is something I'm going to try and lean into a bit more, and I'll try and point it out when I do it in my videos, because it's something that takes a lot of practice, and it's something you want to work towards as a photographer, but it can be really, really effective. So like I said, a really short and quick video to highlight a few lessons from some recent pictures that I've gotten. I hope that's been helpful. If you've got any more questions, then feel free to ask below. Or if you've got anything that you like to use when it comes to either flat light or harsh light, then feel free to comment that below as well so that others can see it. Just as a bit of housekeeping, my upload schedule might be a bit hit and miss over the next couple of weeks. I've got a couple of weeks off work, so I'm going to take some time off from the family. I'm not committing to doing videos, although I intend on doing videos, but if I don't really have any videos uploaded in the next couple of weeks, you know why. But I'll be back on it once I'm back from holiday. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, give it a thumbs up. If you want to watch another video where I use light in my pictures, then watch this video here, and I'll see you next time.